Alright, so what if I told you could improve your photography doing this one simple step to your composition? Now, this one simple step is called rule of thirds. Now, it's very simple. You could set it up on your camera so it's easy for you to follow along. Filmmakers use this, photographers use this, and it's good to know this rule so you could follow it, but more important, you could always not follow it. And that could result in some interesting images, but as long as you know it's there, you become more self-aware when you take photos, and overall it'll produce some great quality photos. So let's go ahead and dive into this, and we'll talk about some of these images, okay? So first we got this image of this grad student I took. Now, looking at this, you could see some leading lines, obviously. I would say this is center framed. Now let's go ahead and pull up the rule of thirds, okay guys? Now look at that. Let's go ahead and pull up this little visual aid I used too. So you can see the leading lines from her arm, from her jacket, lead right up to her head. But more importantly, her eye is right on the upper third of the rule of thirds. This is the rule of thirds, by the way. It's this little grid. It cuts your image up into thirds. So you could do this vertical or horizontal. Either way works. But this is a strong image because it's center framed and her eyes are lined up right on this line. Now if you wanted to make it even more of a strong image, you could line up her one eye on this little vertex right here. Is that the right word? This little corner. And it'll just make a more appealing image. Now what I did here in this little visual aid is I just showed the lines and her face, how they contribute to each other. And overall this is a pretty balanced image. Everything is in frame nice. So let's go and move on to another image, okay guys? Okay, let's go and look at this grad photo right here. Now this grad photo I took, as you can see, it's center framed again. His eyes are pretty much directly on the upper thirds. I think it's important to keep them kind of on or above or somewhere in the area. You want to give them a little headroom most of the time. So I think that made it a nice image. Now this is pretty center framed, so it's not very visually interesting. It's very informative and straight to the point. Like, you know what you're looking at. You don't have to guess. Gets your mind to the point very quickly. So let's go ahead and look at another one. Now here's more of a visually interesting one. So I took this one as well. We're just going to check it out before. You can already kind of guess. Your mind knows the rule of thirds automatically. So you can kind of dissect this image up into thirds, and you can see that this car is falling in the lower, and then he's falling in the upper thirds. Now by doing it this way, you kind of play a balance game. So the image is properly balanced, so to speak. Now there's information in the bottom half of the image and information in the top half. That's what we mean when we say balanced. And the information kind of works together. It's not dogs in the lower half and then squirrels in the upper half. You know, it's very harmonious, I guess you could say. They work nicely together. They add to the story, if you will. So this is visually interesting, I believe. You could see some leading lines too if you really wanted to look into that. Kind of draw you up to his face. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one here, guys. Alright, which one are we going to look at next? Let's go ahead and look at this one of my dog next. This is very center framed again. You could see that instantly just by looking at it. You don't even got to take a second. Very center framed, very formal, straight to the point. No guesswork here. You already know what's going on. Now it's a good image. I would say these are formal images, like they're good images. It's very easy way to get a good image, if you will. Let's go and look at a more complex image. Alright, so look what we have here, guys. Now this is more visually interesting than my other images. Let's go ahead and check out why. Immediately you could see, because it's some of the leading lines that help this image a lot, such as the car, the skateboard, his hands, car. More importantly, he's center framed. So the subject is center framed, everything else aids to the center framing. So If I just had none of these lines and just him center frame, it would be an okay image. But the other thirds aid in the center frame, so it helps you guide. It guides your eye more, is what I'm trying to say. Images that guide your eye are more appealing, so you want to try to do that in your images. I personally like to try to center frame my subjects and then have stuff point towards them, if that makes sense. Now, I don't always do this. Sometimes I would use two parts of the frame, say this part and this part, to get hidden by a wall, and then you could use this part for your subject. You could play around with it, or if it's a landscape, you could do the opposite. Put the horizon right here, dirt, clouds, stuff like that. But this image is interesting for the fact that the leading lines are there and they help tell the story. That's what you want to do. You want to just really aid in telling the story. You don't want to just have crazy lines everywhere. Although that would be fun probably. Let's go and look at another one. This one's of my dog I took. Now immediately you kind of see it's a little balanced. Subjects in the lower left corner. I like to balance it diagonally, as you guys can tell too. Now this adds a little bit to the story. It doesn't add much more than the simple fact that it doesn't distract. So it's not distracting, it's not really adding, so it's kind of neutral, but it gives you a little more information as to the scene or what's going on. It's my dog laying down on the bed, as you can see. This is kind of some dead space. I could have put something here or added something here. I think maybe a toy would have made it look cooler, or more blankets. So I could have used that more wisely, but overall he's more in these two quadrants over here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, now this one is one of my favorites because it feels very balanced, color wise, composition wise. I could show you that right now. I purposely try to place their heads on one of these intersecting lines right here. So I did that here. I nailed it pretty spot on. I also have these leading lines pointing towards my subject, and that just helps the image or the portrait even more. So it just points me towards this strong photograph over here, to what's going on over here. Now, if this wasn't here, I don't think this would have been as strong of an image, just for the simple fact that these leading lines are here. They help tell the story of what's going on over here. So overall, they work well together. It still would have been a decent image if it was just cropped. Say we just cropped it. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Say we just cropped it like right here. Like, that's a cool image, but it doesn't give as much of the story. Doesn't have much of the leading lines, So that's that there. I like to do this a lot, where I take some of the wall up for 2/3 of the frame or so. I think it adds a little more depth to the image, gives you a little more scenery. It's pretty nice to do. It's fun to do as well. Let's go and look at another image. So this one is very, again, center framed. You don't have to do a lot of guesswork. Your brain looks at it and knows exactly what's going on. That's what's fun about these. You can just get straight to the point. So it just literally follows the center framing, as I was saying, all right here. You could even crop this and it wouldn't make that much of a difference, just because there's nothing really adding here. The only thing you'd be missing is maybe some of this money up here. Personally, if I could go back, I would have those a little closer. I think it would have made a nicer photo, but I left it this way because it's more of a more scenery. You can get those in there. I photoshopped a few of these in, but this is a nice image. It's one of my favorite images, but again, it's that kind of old, boring, plain center framing. I could have used some other things to maybe spice it up to help out the center framing, but I didn't. But I should have, maybe like some knives or guns pointed at them. That would have really spiced it up, or money flying in this way. That probably would have made a big difference. It's just something to think about when you're taking images. Let's go ahead and move on to another one. This one's center framed as well. As you guys can see, you guys can kind of see a pattern. I've started to really get out of this now, but it's definitely fun. Once you learn something new, you kind of just stick with it for a while, then you move on. So this one's center framing. Personally, I would have maybe came a little lower, get some of this headroom out of here, because I don't think I needed all of it. I would have got him more in the frame, maybe his head right here, or at least his eyes on this upper grid. But he kind of looks small in this photo. I should have adjusted it, maybe got a lower angle, or zoomed in a bit, and I would have got him more in the upper quadrants. But very center frame, very static. Nothing of motion, diagonal. Usually diagonal lines are more involved with motion. Everything's kind of static here, so it's more of a still image, feels like. I think it's like some others. Let's go ahead and check that out. Now this image has more of motion, and I would say the reason why is because there's like some wind. He's obviously facing this way. Let me go ahead and change that real quick. My bad. There's more diagonal lines going on. Looks like he's looking this way. There's some space right here. That's the hood of the car. The door's open. There's more diagonal lines. There's more action. More of a scenic environment, I guess you could say. Not scenic, but more not aesthetic. What's the word? Dynamic. Looks like there's motion, or there is motion, and as you can see, his hair in the wind, there is motion. His clothes were pretty much flapping in the wind as well, but it's more of a moving image. I think he was moving in this image, probably. Definitely a fun one as well. Most of my images that I've taken are static. Sometimes I do try to set them up to look like they have motion in them, using some vertical lines or some movement. Not motion blur, not to be confused with shutter speed, just the illusion of motion, I guess you could say, to where it looks like an object or a person is moving. Let's go look at this one. This one's a fun one as well. Personally, I would change some things about this image. What I would change would be the framing of his head. I would get some more foreground in here. I would obviously raise the shadows quite a bit, so I would get some more shadows going. And then I would probably have his head up here just a little higher, maybe even an eye right on that center, but I didn't do that. I should have, but this one's properly balanced. I think it's a good image. There's just a few quirks I have to figure out next time I do this. Definitely raise up the shadows, get them higher up, and maybe a backlight, because he has pretty dark hair, so a backlight would have aided in this. But notice how it feels balanced. There's these three are taken up right here. This whole frame is taken up. Might be some trees right here, I guess you could say, but I feel like this is a little empty. Now you don't always have to fill up everything, because then it kind of creates a static image as well, but you know, add some depth. Maybe if that tree wasn't there and it was more of the sunset, it would have been a little better. I kind of wasted this all to the tree, sadly. But things to think about. Let's go and look at another one. This is a good one to look at. Now this one's very, very much vertical. As you can see, it does look more alive. The reason for that is literally because it's vertical lines. There's a vertical line here, that's obviously not vertical, but a vertical line here with his leg, hands going up, vertical, vertical. It's just more motion. Now I obviously have a lot of dead space here. I could have fixed this by shooting at sunset, not at nighttime, but other than that, this is a great image. There's some things I would change, obviously. Let's go and look at another one. Personally, I think it's pretty balanced. I'm going to widen this out so it fits. There we go. Yeah, personally I think it's pretty balanced. His eye lines up perfect. I'm not too upset that hers don't line up perfect with that line. I think that's okay. Her hair kind of droops down in this lower quadrant, so I would say this completes so it's like a full frame. Gets everything in the positions where it needs to be. This aids a little bit. It's not too distracting, doesn't take up too much. Does its purpose, and it's out. Some vertical lines are kind of leading inward, which I really like. But this is a nice image. Otherwise, the only thing I would do different would have a backlight. It would make them pop really drastically. Especially his hair. His hair's kind of dark. His shirt's kind of dark. Her shirt's kind of dark. It would just give them that little 3D feel. But other than that, it's a great image. This is the last one, guys. Okay. One of my favorite ones as well. I got a lot of favorites, huh? Alright. Keep in mind, too, that these are, like, some of my most favorite work. It's not just the throwaway images. Obviously, a lot of the images I take I don't like. You're probably the same. But, you know. This is one of my favorites because I think it adds in the scene a lot. And I added stuff to make it really a complete image. So you can see some diagonal lines lead to her face. Obviously, this little rainbow right here I added. It's like a little prism effect. I added this shadow back here to make it more dynamic. We just pushed this plant in right here just to add a little more to the scene, but not too much. We didn't want to plant like right there behind her head. But I think that shadow adds enough to the background to create some depth. I also had a flash in the back to really give it that pop and that yellow color in the background. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had that. I think it was very dark, very bland. I also added, I don't know if you could see, some window shades on her face. You can see a few of them. You can see some right here mostly. It's going to take off that row third. You can see it right there. But yeah, great image. Personally, not much I would change in this image. Maybe I would have the background a little darker shade because I feel like it's all kind of monotone with color. What is it? Monochromatic? Not monotone, but monochromatic. I would have a different shade in the background to really give it that pop, that color contrast. Maybe even some, I think I'm lacking some blacks, maybe a little more darker blacks right here. But other than that, good shoot. Let's check out this last center framed one, okay guys? Okay, now this one's one of my favorites. I took this using some vintage glass, by the way. But her eyes are lined up directly onto that. It's very straight to the point, formal headshot, as you can see. Not a lot to think about. It's just visually you get to the point. Headshots, that's kind of what they are. Unless it's more of a creative headshot, then you'll kind of like play some guesswork with your mind. But I like this one. Is a very nice image. Yeah, I don't know what I would differently. I think I would add some background texture maybe. I could have done that. I could have cleaned up those hairs right there. And then pretty much I would have brought this out, I think, color wise and texture wise, because it's a nice little sweater. So I would have brought that out more. And maybe some hair highlights, but other than that, not much. But yeah, so that's rule of thirds. That's how you could use it. It's just great to look at examples so you know what to look at in your own work, and when you're out shooting you could look for it as well. So see you guys in the next one. What should I do next? Let's do more of some leading lines. I think you guys would like that more. Rule of thirds is kind of plain, kind of boring, but you know it's essential. It'll help you a lot. So leading lines next.